Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining the 2019 Innovations at Work mini-series. Please note that all participant lines will be on listen-only mode for the duration of this presentation. Should you require technical assistance, send a private note to the event producer via the chat panel located on the lower right-hand side of your screen, or call our help desk at 1-888-796-6118. With that, I'd like to turn things over to Nurse Jessie. Ed.
Hello and welcome to our third mini session of 2019, Happiness, a Business Strategy. These are conversations with experts on relevant topics that you've asked to hear more about. And we're excited to bring to you today our featured guest, Virginia Pothier, CEO and co-founder of Hapacus, a pioneering company in the field of mental well-being and happiness. This promises to be a very eye-opening and informative session, and I can't wait to get started. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you so much, Jessie. What a fantastic start. I got to start with forgetting to take my phone off mute. Hooray! Thank you for the invitation to be here today and to present what I find a very exciting field in the science of happiness. Now, there we go. Hello, thank you all. Okay, as Jessie mentioned, I am the CEO of a company called Hapacus. It is a company focused on mental well-being. It's based on the science of happiness. We're going to talk about what in the world that even means. So we're going to back up a little bit to get you familiar with where this all started. So 20 years ago, in 1998, the country of Bhutan, for those of you not familiar with it, as I was not, is a little north of India, a little west of China. The Prime Minister presented to the United Nations a concept that they called GHI. Now, GHI stands for Gross Happiness Index. And the Prime Minister pointed out to those gathered at the United Nations that their constitution stated that if a government cannot help its people to become happy, then the government serves no purpose. So in addition to measuring GDP, Bhutan was going to introduce GHI. And since that point in time, they have aggressively sought to measure what it is that they're doing and the impact that it has on the happiness of their people. Now, after that presentation, the response on a global level was significant and noteworthy. The United Nations has produced on an annual basis a World Happiness Report. Now, in case you think that using the word happiness means it's something like, like a People magazine, these reports, the last report was over 170 pages long, and there are submissions by microeconomists and neuroscientists. So from the United Nations front, they are looking globally to see if the endeavors and programs in place are actually improving the quality of people's lives. Now let's talk about how that has also trickled down to academic awareness. So here's just a small sampling of some of the universities in the United States of America that are currently teaching courses on this science of happiness. There are over 200 universities actively teaching courses. This interest in this topic has also trickled down to your basic magazine journalism level. These are actual magazines that have been produced trying to help people get up to speed on this new field of research. In this process, Hapacus was formed in the middle of all of this, about halfway through. And what you see in front of you is an advisory board. So these are leading researchers in this field, and they span the country. You'll see some of these people on CNN. Everything that you're going to hear and all Hapacus materials have been vetted by these experts. Working with these experts, a training program was developed to help people understand what researchers and scientists are learning about human happiness, human flourishing, and how it affects all of us. And since Hapacus started in 2011, we are now in 8 countries, which is representative of the fact that this is of global interest. Okay, so let's just ask ourselves a basic question here. When Bhutan presented GHI, why did it strike such a nerve? Why was there such a response? Because researchers are tracking things that you and I aren't watching. You see in front of you an actual graph, and you notice that the dark blue line is a very healthy and robust upward trajectory of the gross national product of the United States of America. The red line on the bottom indicates the happiness levels, and yes, they have been tracking the happiness levels of our citizens since basically the end of the 40s. So this graph shows you a trajectory over 50 years. And industry leaders, economists, governments are saying, what is happening? Why are we better off financially, and yet we're not better off in happiness and well-being? What researchers know is that our people are languishing. Now, when I say our people, I am talking our employees, our families, our communities, our country. You look at the data here. The CDC reports that the use of antidepressants has gone up 800% in 2 decades. The World Health Organization predicts that depression will be the 2nd leading illness in the world by 2020. Yeah, that's next year. And Gallup tells us that 85% of our people describe themselves in some state of disengagement.
Wow, just pausing here, Virginia, this data really illustrates that we can't separate the employee and say that we aren't this whole person, all-encompassing work and life. The data shows us that, wow, it impacts, mental well-being impacts everything that we do.
Well, Nurse Jessie, you hit the nail on the head. I have, upon occasion, had leaders say, hey, look, we give them a paycheck. I expect them to check their emotions at the door. And the reality is that doesn't happen. And in fact, when organizations invest in their people, you start to see this turnaround. Now, before we get to the turnaround, we're going to explore languishing. You'll see that it's in quotes because it's a very scientific term. And it means people operating below their mental optimum. So when you say, we're talking about the whole person here, the person that walks in your door, whatever they're bringing from home, is part of what's contributing to their performance in the workplace. So that placeholder is called languishing. Now, the interesting thing is with all the data that shows 85% disengagement, you have Harvard Business Review saying people are still really important here. In fact, they say they remain the ultimate source of competitive advantage. So while we're all a little bit concerned about artificial intelligence and the robots that are coming, the reality is we still need our people. They are vital to the success of our organization, which creates quite an interesting dilemma when 85% of them are checked out in some way. So when Bhutan presented GHI, it was kind of a wake-up call where people said, oh, you're right. We can't continue doing the same thing. And that has helped usher in this new era focused on mental wellness. Now, the topic for our discussion today is happiness, a business strategy. So let's drill a little bit into that, and let's ask ourselves, how do researchers approach happiness, which you'll see in quotes? And first off, we as lay people tend to think, are people happy or unhappy? Researchers don't use that terminology. Happiness is too vague and it's subjective. Your happiness is different than my happiness. So when they talk about optimal functioning, they use the placeholders of flourishing and languishing. So as we begin to build our business strategy towards improving the mental well-being of our people, we have to start with building a common vocabulary. And flourishing is the goal, right? Happiness is the byproduct, flourishing is the goal. Now, let's just spend 1 second exploring that a little bit. Because when you say flourishing, people think it's just another placeholder word for happiness. And I will tell you that's not how researchers work. So if you're looking here in front of you, and don't worry, there's no quiz at the end here, but researchers are tracking human functioning over 3 dimensions. How are you doing emotionally, socially, and mentally? And 14 traits. So when they're measuring where your people are on the mental well-being spectrum, they're looking at all 14 traits. What you see in front of you, this flourishing model, this bell curve, is an actual representation of the adults in America. You'll see, while our goal is flourishing, only 20% of Americans spend most of their time in that category. The reality is that most of our people, including ourselves, are spending our time to the left of flourishing. You'll see that 80%, researchers find 80% of people are not in that flourishing zone, which correlates with the Gallup finding of disengagement. So with this 80% in this zone, it's becoming more clear from the science of happiness perspective that our goal as leaders is to help more people flourish. That is the goal of the researchers. How do we expand this zone? How do we get more people there? Studies have found that when you do focus on and invest in the mental wellness of your people, which we all call happiness, when you include that kind of strategy, it's a win-win. All boats rise. Flourishing people, flourishing organizations. You see here on your screen, the data shows productivity, sales, and engagement all go way up when our people are, air quotes, happier. Studies also find that happier employees lead to a reduction in turnover, in sick leave, and in burnout.
You know, Virginia, this slide really reminds me of how looking at the numbers in front of us that we make that case that mental well-being strategies are just as important as physical well-being strategies, that risk management side of it, that is really, again, benefiting that employee, like you said, and benefiting that company. The numbers don't lie.
You're absolutely right. And Jesse, we have worked with hospital systems that have found that the wellness programs designed to help people lose weight haven't been as successful as they thought they would be. And they realize that the underpinnings of everything we do, the choices that we make, are based, they start in our brain, in our emotions. So it's no surprise that when organizations invest in mental well-being, they actually experience high results in things like engagement and productivity. Now, what has science learned in 20 years as they've been studying this? And one of the findings I find just fascinating is that part of the challenge that we have is that all of us have an ancient brain in a modern world. And that ancient brain has survival instincts. It has behaviors. It has patterns that it has run for so long that in our modern world, it's pulling us left. Our own brain is pulling us left. So let's explore a little bit of why that's the case. And just think back on maybe the past 100, 150 years. And when you consider that for a long time we were primarily an agricultural country, and then we became a manufacturing society. And now the largest growing sector are knowledge workers. So our environment has changed dramatically. We now have devices that give us instant information on our phones. The problem is the brain hasn't evolved in 2 to 3 generations. In fact, it doesn't evolve that fast. Now, don't get me wrong, it does evolve, So here's the latest arrival on the scene in our brain, and it's your prefrontal cortex, and that's an important player as we move forward. So the PFC, we're so close that I have a nickname for it. The PFC, one of its responsibilities is logic and reason. Let's talk about another area of our brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is right above your ear. You could just reach straight up above your ear, and the amygdala is responsible for detecting threats. One of its responsibilities, a major one, is detecting threats and triggering a response from us. So when we talk about fight or flight, this is the amygdala in play. So the amygdala is responsible for a lot of emotional reactions. Now, the beautiful thing here is we have two of them. There's actually one on each side of your head. So as we move forward, keep in mind, they're kind of outnumbered. When we talked about how our brain evolves, the PFC came on the scene about 2 million years ago. The amygdala has been around 500 million. So if we say to ourselves, hey, yeah, we're in a modern society, but, I'm just going to kind of wait for the brain to evolve and catch up, well, that's going to be a very, very long wait. An important thing to consider about the amygdala is that it has been around so long that it is really, really good at detecting threats. In addition to that, it is 8 times faster. Let me repeat that, 8 times faster than the PFC. Now, the brain's fast, right? We're talking about microseconds here. But 8 times faster means that we are often emotionally hijacked before logic has a chance to kick in. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're asleep in bed, having wonderful dreams, and all of a sudden, bang! What's the first feeling that you experience? Most people will say, fear, anxiety, worry. If you lay there for a second, you'll hear the PFC say, oh, you know what, actually, that sounded like the trash hitting the floor. Oh, I shouldn't have left it by the front door. I think the darn cat got into the trash. So in that small example, you can see the role of the amygdala, right? Feel fear, alert, respond, and then you can hear the PFC catch in. Well, calm down, put the baseball bat down. It's probably fine. So becoming aware of what's happening inside your own head and the head of your people is important. Because with an amygdala that has instant information, whether it's shootings in mosques or global warming or whales dying because they swallowed plastic, our amygdala is triggered all the time. And so often our brain kind of feels like this. It's kind of messy and cluttered and overheated. And that is a representation of languishing. What researchers are working on is trying to help all of us retrain our brain so that it can look more like this. This image in front of you is more representative of flourishing. Now, the beautiful thing is, what we've learned from neuroscience is the brain is very plastic. They call it neuroplasticity. It can be taught. It can change. Otherwise, this would just be a wasted conversation. So let's dive into that a little bit more. But as we do so, I just want to address something here. Those of us who are listening to this, we all wear two hats, right? There's the hat of ourself. Ourself wants to be happier. Ourself wants to spend more time in flourishing. But we're also responsible for people. So the leader in us is looking at, how do I help my people move into flourishing? For the rest of our conversation, I want you primarily to focus on yourself, because the reality is that we build a culture by modeling it. So it's one thing to tell people what they need to do, but the most compelling example is when we model it. So we're going to focus on hat number one right now, which is ourself. How do we get ourselves to flourishing? Well, the beautiful thing is that researchers have said, hey, here's a simple, very simple process that will move you more frequently into that flourishing zone. The 3 steps towards flourishing are catch, check, and change. So you can see the bell curve is still there, right? On the left, we've got the languishing. On the right, we've got flourishing. So let's take a look at how each of these plays a role in retraining our brains. Number one, we want to catch the emotion. So as we experienced in the example of the trash falling over in the night, when the amygdala sounds the alarm, it comes with emotion. So start paying attention to your emotions, especially the strong ones. Will you catch all of them? No. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I don't catch all of them. But start practicing, right? So when you feel that strong emotion, oh, hello, amygdala. Number two, you're going to check the reaction. Was the reaction from your amygdala reasonable, or was it unreasonable? Well, if you heard the trash hit the floor and you jumped up and you grabbed a baseball bat and you called 911, and that is perhaps an unreasonable reaction. Most of the time when the amygdala reacts, it's over the top. You see, the amygdala was developed to help us detect tigers and tribes that were going to try and kill us, right? We don't experience that world anymore. You look at the FBI data, and we are the safest society we have been ever. Now, you don't know that looking at your phone, but that is a fact. So you're going to check your amygdala. Am I having a reasonable reaction, or is it over the top? Once you've done that, now you're going to tap into that PFC. You slow things down for a second, and you're going to use the PFC to change the thought. Now, we're going to explore how you do that. So we're going to practice it right here. And I know everybody's muted, so you can either say your answer out loud or you can say it to yourself in case your coworkers think you're crazy. So I'm going to read a scenario, and I want you to catch the emotion that you experience. A new employee is hired to fill a position with your exact same job description. Most people express a little concern, a little anxiety, a little worry when they hear this. The key is to pay attention to what kind of response you felt from your amygdala. Every once in a while, I'll hear somebody say, oh, I experienced relief. Yay, I've got help coming. Most of the time, people start feeling that gnawing anxiety. Now, in step two, when we're checking it, consider this scenario. Your last performance review didn't go well, and your company has announced future layoffs. Okay. Across the board, people are like, okay, yeah, I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling anxious when I hear this. Now, you're going to check that emotion. Is it reasonable? In this scenario, it's probably reasonable. You might want to be brushing up your resume, looking at LinkedIn, taking some action. So this is not to say that the amygdala doesn't serve a vital purpose. It does. It's just that most of the time it doesn't. So we have an ancient brain that we're getting familiar with. Now, we've experienced catch and check, and we're going to turn our focus to change, and we're going to look at some of the tools that we have to retrain the amygdala. What has research found? And you'll be happy to know we're going to go through all 8 of these in great detail, and you're going to be on this call for 3 days. I am kidding. We're going to focus on one. We're going to narrow focus down to reframe, because reframe is an easy concept to grasp and to implement. So I am sure most of us can recall the time when we had a picture in our home and we decided to just change the frame. And when you do that, all of a sudden it just kind of looks a little different. Different colors jump out. So the reframe is the process of changing the thought that came with the amygdala. Why is that so important? So when we've talked about the amygdala, we've talked about how long it's been around. We've talked about its role with emotion. And we've talked about how it hijacks us and it's super fast. I haven't talked about is how heavy and sticky a negative emotion is. It's actually called negativity bias. Our brain prefers negative information. In study after study, people will hold on to a negative piece of information way longer than they will positive. This bias is actually creating a neurological imbalance. And when you consider everything in the news, every alert that you get on your phone, everything that people talk about at work, we are imbalanced all the time. Well, the beauty is researchers have said, hey, you know what? We can tell you, based on our research findings, how many positive experiences you need to balance out one negative. The minimum is 3. If you're an overachiever, shoot for 5. That's really more recommended, but if we're going to take baby steps here, 3. So consider when you're conducting performance reviews, are you keeping it balanced? Now, back to reframe. When we reframe with catch, check, and change, we balance out that negativity bias, and we begin to retrain our amygdala to stop running around like a crazy 5-year-old. So we're going to look at those scenarios that we talked about earlier, and we're going to practice it. So the scenario where a new employee is hired to fill a position with your exact same job description. I'm going to ask you for a few seconds to reframe that. And I don't expect you to respond. Just think about it. How could you reframe that? So I indicated that occasionally I hear someone who says, hey, maybe they're bringing in help. That is a process of reframing. And whether or not they are is kind of irrelevant at this moment. You're managing your mental well-being. So find a positive way to reframe a negative response. Let's look at the second example that we considered, and that's your performance review. Didn't go so well, and now there's a reduction in force that's been announced. How in the world do you reframe that? That one might be a little bit more challenging, but the reality is you can still say, well, maybe, it's time for a change. Maybe I'm ready for something new. Maybe I've outgrown this, or there's some passion that I want to pursue. The key is reframe. Now, I'll often have people say to me, hey, you know what, Virginia? A lot of this is kind of common sense, right? And it is. What researchers are finding is common sense. When we hear it, we're kind of like, yeah, I kind of get that, and I kind of do practice it. But the reality is that common sense is not common practice. That is why we have training programs. That is why we have initiatives and goals and rewards and wellness programs. If it were just common sense, we wouldn't have 85% of our employees disengaged.
You know what this sounds like, Virginia? It sounds like empowerment. It really sounds like taking back that ownership of our own personal reality by literally reframing the way that we're reacting to different situations or relationships. Even at work, it kind of looks like hope.
Oh, I love that. I love that characterization, Nurse Jessie. It is hope. And I love that you said that ownership, because so often we externalize. Our problems are all out there. It's my boss, it's my coworker, it's my spouse. And what an interesting perspective to say, well, holy cow, it starts in me. I have to begin to manage my own brain. So now let's put on your other hat. Let's put on your leader hat, and let's consider how you are incorporating mental wellness in your programs. So I would encourage everyone to review their business strategy and take a look, seriously look at how you are investing in happiness. I got air quotes going on here. You now know it is flourishing. Regardless of what you call it, it's an extremely important process. Now, to wrap things up here, I'm going to give you my contact information. Again, the company's name is Hapacus. I say that because it's an unusual one. You have my personal email address. You also have my cell phone. If you have any questions whatsoever, please give me a call. I also want to point out to you that changing the trajectory of the happiness of our people and our community and our country is so important to us that we are offering a free keynote for all of 2019. So if you reach out to me and you say, oh my gosh, come in here, I need you to share this with my organization, you have my contact information, let me know. You see at the bottom, all we ask for is that you would cover travel expenses. We do have clients in Malaysia and any ancillary expenses that might come up. So thank you all for your time and your interest in this topic. I will now turn things over to Nurse Jessie, and thank you, Jessie, for inviting me to be here today.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And, not only did we learn a lot, but we actually have actionable takeaways, which is one thing we always want to give our listeners. And our one last question, Virginia, it's kind of a fun one, but it helps our audience get to know you. Who would play you in a TV sitcom?
Who would play me in a TV sitcom? Oh, my gosh, this is kind of a funny question. Okay, knee-jerk reaction, but I'm going to say Courtney Cox. Now, let me be clear. It's not because I look like Courtney Cox. It's because when I remember her from Friends, she seems a little quirky, a little OCD, a little maybe too far on the perfectionism scale, maybe some control issues.
Love it.
So I think I would choose.
Thank you for sharing. So as you see on your screen, we would like to invite you to our next Health and Innovations at Work mini session, Designing for Health, a campus-wide approach to well-being, where we'll be joined by our local Dr. Bruce Robinson and Crystal Waller. They are directors and I would say they're pioneers in this area right here from our St. Norbert College, looking at how we can learn from them to design our own organizations to really facilitate well-being through the environments that we live and work in. So be sure to register with that. I will send out that information with this recording as well, and thank you all for joining us.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.